When Olivia, Marcus, and Rachel first stepped into the long-abandoned theater, they felt the weight of history pressing down on them. The theater was grand once. That much was clear. Dust-covered chandeliers still hung from the ceiling like forgotten relics, their glass crystals dull in the dim light filtering through the cracked, dirty windows. The rows of velvet seats were coated in grime. The red fabric faded to a dull maroon, but the grandeur of the place was undeniable. They were there to rehearse a modern adaptation of an old play, a passion project of Olivia's. The theater, they agreed, provided the perfect atmosphere for their gritty reinterpretation. Cheap to rent, too, and far from noise of the city. As they unpacked their props on the stage, Olivia noticed something odd. There was an old lamp, an ancient-looking thing with a bulb that glowed weakly despite being unplugged. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the lamp. "Must be the ghost light," Marcus said with a chuckle. "They used to leave those on to keep the spirits away, or maybe to keep them company." Rachel shot him a look. "Not funny. Let's just get this over with." The first few hours of rehearsal went smoothly. They worked through their lines, blocking the scenes, their voices echoing off the walls of the empty theater. Yet, the longer they stayed, the more Olivia felt something was off. The air seemed heavier, almost oppressive. She found herself glancing into the shadows more often than usual, convinced that someone, was watching them. The first real sign of trouble came when Rachel forgot her lines. It wasn't like her to fumble. She was always prepared, always professional. But as she stood on the stage, her eyes widened, her breath quickened, and her voice faltered. I'm sorry," she stammered, shaking her head as if to clear it. I heard something." "What are you talking about?" Marcus asked, stepping closer to her. There was a whisper. "Right in my ear," Rachel insisted, rubbing her ear as if the sound had left a physical mark. They dismissed it as nerves, but Olivia couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. She tried to focus on the play, but the whispers continued. A low murmur just at the edge of hearing, like a conversation in another room. Whenever they turned to listen, it stopped, leaving them in oppressive silence. As the night wore on, things began to escalate. It started with small things. A prop would be in a different place than where they left it. The curtains would sway as if brushed by an invisible hand. The temperature would drop suddenly, chilling them to the bone. Then, during a particularly intense scene, Marcus tripped and fell hard on the stage, though there was nothing to trip over. "It felt like someone grabbed my leg," he muttered, his face pale as he looked down at his ankle, now bruised and swelling. "Maybe we should call it a night," Olivia suggested, though she wasn't sure why the words felt like a betrayal, as if something within the theater didn't want them to leave. But Marcus, stubborn and determined, insisted they push on. "We're so close to getting this right, just one more run through." Reluctantly, Olivia and Rachel agreed. They reset the scene, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. That's when they saw him. He was standing in the shadows of the wings, just out of the light. At first, Olivia thought it was her imagination, a trick of the dim light and their frayed nerves, but as they continued the scene, the figure moved closer, stepping into the dim light of the stage. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a suit that might have been fashionable a century ago. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his skin had the pallor of someone long dead. Rachel screamed, dropping her script as she backed away, but the figure did not advance. Instead, he seemed to melt into the floor, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was absolute, the air thick with terror. "Did you see that?" Marcus whispered, his voice shaking. Olivia nodded slowly, her mind racing. "Who was that?" Rachel, still trembling, found her voice. I think that was Victor Hale." "Victor Hale? The actor who died on stage?" Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "His last performance," Olivia murmured, recalling the stories she had read about the theater. "They say he died in this very theater, during a rehearsal. Some say his spirit never left." Determined to get to the bottom of the haunting, Olivia suggested they try to communicate with Victor. It was a foolish idea, and she knew it, but there was a part of her that was curious, a part that wanted to know if the stories were true. They set up a simple seance, sitting in a circle on the stage, their hands joined. The theater seemed to close in around them, the darkness thickening, the cold seeping into their bones. "Victor Hale," Olivia called into the void, "if you are here, give us a sign." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the ghost light flickered, its weak glow pulsing like a heartbeat. The air grew colder, and a voice that did not belong to any of them, echoed through the theater. "Run the scene," it whispered, so soft they almost didn't hear it. Did you hear that?" Rachel stammered, her grip tightening on Olivia's hand. "Run the scene," the voice repeated, louder this time, more insistent. Without thinking, they began to recite their lines, their voices shaky, their movements stiff with fear. As they did, the temperature continued to drop, and the ghost light flickered faster, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then, just as they reached the climax of the scene, the lights went out. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating void that pressed in on them from all sides. "Keep going," Marcus urged, though his voice was trembling. "We have to finish this." They continued, their voices the only sound in the theater. Then, out of the darkness, the figure of Victor Hale emerged, standing right in the center of the stage. This time, he did not vanish. He stood there watching them with hollow eyes, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice that was both haunting and sorrowful, he spoke the final line of the play, the line that Victor Hale had never had the chance to deliver. The moment the line was spoken, the lights flickered back on, and the ghost light went out completely. Victor Hale was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. They stood there frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The air was heavy with the weight of the final words spoken by the ghost, the echo of a performance that had never been completed. I think he just wanted to finish the play," Rachel said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Olivia nodded, but something in her gut told her that wasn't the end of it. They had disturbed something, awakened something, that should have been left alone. As they packed up their things to leave, Marcus noticed something strange. The ghost light, the one that had flickered out, was glowing again, but this time it was a deep, ominous red. "Is it supposed to do that?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. "No," Olivia replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "No, it's not." They left the theater in a hurry. The image of that blood-red light burned into their minds. They tried to put it behind them, to forget what had happened, but the theater had left its mark on them. A few days later, Olivia received a package in the mail. Inside was an old photograph, yellowed with age. It showed the cast of an old play, standing on the stage of that very theater. In the center, smiling proudly, was Victor Hale. And there, in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, were the three of them, Olivia, Marcus, and Rachel, frozen in time, trapped in the ghostly photograph as if they had always been a part of that final, tragic performance.